Look around at the brutal, unforgiving natural world. A pack of wolves howling beneath a freezing, isolated moon, or chimpanzees swinging deep in the shadowy, damp jungle. They all share one ultimate biological shield, wrapping their bodies in thick, warm layers of fur to survive the harsh elements of the wild. Yet, the most dominant creature on this entire planet, the one who built glowing cities in the dark and reached for the stars, is the only primate that completely stripped away this primal cloak. Let us rewind the clock. 160 million years ago, in the petrified forests of ancient northeastern China, we find Megaconus, a tiny prehistoric link walking the earth long before modern mammals. Paleontologists chiseling through sedimentary rock were absolutely stunned by a groundbreaking discovery: clear, undeniable traces of fur on such an ancient creature. This proved that fur is an ancient masterpiece of evolution, a survival tool with roots far deeper than we ever imagined. So, the grand, terrifying question remains for all of us. Why would our ancestors voluntarily discard their ultimate biological armor and step out completely naked into a deadly, open world? Yet the greatest strength is also a fatal weakness. When the environment turns hostile and temperatures skyrocket, that perfect biological shield suddenly transforms into an inescapable furnace. For the vast majority of mammals, their only defense against the crushing, overwhelming heat is to seek the shade and pant desperately to save their boiling brains. Short, rapid breaths pull air across the wet surface of their tongues, carrying away just enough heat to stave off a dark collapse. But this primitive defense has a terrifying, absolute limit. If their bodies attempt to sweat, the tragedy worsens. Moisture clumps the thick fur together, turning it into a suffocating, heavy blanket, like wearing a soaking wet winter coat in the blistering summer. It completely blocks air circulation, trapping the massive internal heat and rapidly accelerating the fatal process of overheating. Bound by this physical prison, the entire animal kingdom is enslaved by the weather. When the merciless midday sun blazes from above, they have no choice but to surrender, forced to abandon their hunts and hide in the dark. The invisible ceiling of temperature limits their every single move. So why did humanity decide to break this ancient rule? Why did our ancestors dare to step out of the comforting shadows and boldly expose their fragile, bare skin to the absolute wrath of the sun? The terrifying answer lies in a single, earth-shattering shift in our evolution. The greatest turning point in human history didn't begin with a sudden explosion of intelligence in the brain. It began much lower down. It began with our feet. Let's look back at Australopithecus, our distant evolutionary cousin who roamed East Africa over 4 million years ago. Fossilized pelvis and thigh bones reveal their clumsy, wobbly first steps upon the ground during the day, but their long, curved fingers and muscular shoulder blades tell a very different, cautious story of survival. When the sun set, or when danger prowled the tall grass, they remained masterful, agile climbers. The trees were their ancient fortress, a safe, leafy canopy protecting them from the terrors of the ground. They hadn't fully severed the biological umbilical cord, tying them to their ancestral home high above. But then, the Earth's climate underwent a violent, unforgiving transformation, altering the course of destiny forever. The dense, protective jungles began to wither and shrink, completely giving way to vast, open grasslands. The comforting shadows of the forest edge vanished, leaving our ancestors totally exposed under a brutal, blazing sky. To survive, they had to make a terrifying choice. It took another 2 million years until Homo erectus, the upright human, finally emerged and permanently cut ties with the trees. Stepping out into the endless, unshaded savanna on 2 legs was an absolute death sentence for any normal creature. How could a slow, hairless and weaponless primate possibly survive out there? Homo erectus didn't just stand up. They unlocked a biological masterclass in biomechanics. Look closely at their frame. A perfectly balanced, bowl-shaped pelvis, and a spine engineered like a coiled spring. Unlike the heavy, stooped apes, their long, sinewy legs were forged by the merciless demands of the open plains, designed not merely to walk, but to conquer immense, sweeping distances under the scorching sun. Every step is a marvel of energy conservation, a rhythmic pendulum swinging with deadly, silent efficiency. Even the Achilles tendon acts like a massive rubber band, storing and releasing kinetic energy with every single footfall, a mechanism completely absent in our closest primate cousins. This specific anatomy paints a clear, chilling picture. We were not shaped to hide, nor were we shaped to sprint. We were born to run. In the wild, speed is the ultimate currency. Predators like the cheetah rely on a sudden, explosive burst of velocity, a chaotic blur of muscle and agility that ends the chase in mere seconds. But if that initial powerful burst fails to secure a catch, the sprinter collapses, entirely drained of power. Humans, however, played a completely different game, a much slower and psychologically grueling game of survival. They realized that they didn't need to be the fastest creature on the glowing savanna, because their true weapon wasn't speed at all. It was an inescapable, relentless nightmare of endurance. Nature always favored the quick, the explosive, but on the blistering African savanna, our ancestors introduced a terrifying new game of psychological and physical attrition. A group of Homo erectus hunters locked their ancient eyes onto a distant antelope, separated by waves of intense heat. They don't sprint, they don't ambush, they simply begin to track. Startled, the antelope bursts into a frantic sprint, easily putting miles between itself and the slow pursuers. It finds a solitary patch of shade beneath a withered tree, heavily panting to expel the building heat, believing it has easily escaped the distant, slow-moving danger. But just as its racing heart begins to settle, a terrifying sight emerges from the shimmering horizon. The hunters. They never stop moving. Forced out of the shadows, the prey must run again, pushing its fur-covered body back into the scorching furnace, while the hunters merely maintain their unbreakable, steady jogging pace, like shadows that cannot be outrun. This relentless cycle repeats, hour after exhausting hour. The prey is given no time to pant, no time to cool down. Its thick fur traps the immense heat inside. The animal isn't running from sharp claws. It is running from its own biological limits in an inescapable war of two vastly different cooling systems. As the relentless, grueling chase extends well past the 5-hour mark, under the merciless, unforgiving African sun, the desperate antelope's internal body temperature rapidly crosses a critical, catastrophic threshold that it simply cannot survive. Its thick coat, originally designed for freezing nights, now acts as a sealed, inescapable oven, slowly roasting its own brain from the inside out. The glowing world blurs, muscles seize up. The mighty creature completely loses control of its trembling limbs. It is no longer a battle of speed, agility, or strength. It is a total, irreversible biological system failure. Just like an overworked modern machine pushed far beyond its cooling capacity until the engine literally smokes and breaks down, the magnificent animal finally stumbles blindly, its vision entirely darkening as it heavily collapses into the dry dust, completely overcome by extreme heat exhaustion, unable to rise ever again. A long moment later, the dark, looming shadow of the bipedal hunter falls quietly over the defeated prey. He hasn't stopped running for hours. He carries no heavy armor, yet his brain remains perfectly cool. his vision razor-sharp and absolutely focused on the prize. While the magnificent beast was tragically baked alive inside its own thick fur, the naked, fragile hunter was constantly radiating massive amounts of heat into the wild wind. But exactly how? But stripping off this protective fur was not a simple, overnight miracle. It was a terrifying gamble. Shedding your heavy coat during the boiling day gives you a massive, life-saving advantage. But when the sun sets over the savanna, the night becomes a freezing, merciless scythe. Without fire, which wouldn't be mastered for millions of years, a naked primate would easily perish in the dark cold. Therefore, our early ancestors likely retained their thick coats until the very end, forcing this radical transformation to happen much later, hidden deep within our genetic code. When the thick hair finally thinned out, our pale, bare skin was completely exposed to the absolutely destructive, flesh-burning, ultraviolet radiation of the unforgiving sun. To survive this, modern humans desperately slather on sticky, thick, chemical layers of white sunscreen, but our ancient ancestors flooded their own bodies with a natural, powerful, dark shield of melanin. Scientists traced a specific genetic mutation, the MC1R gene, dating back over 1.2 million years, proving that the grand, dark-skinned hunters of the savanna had already conquered the sunlight. But a dark, protective shield alone wasn't enough to prevent internal overheating during a relentless run. The nakedness was merely the first half of an incredibly complex biological master plan. To truly conquer the heat, this naked machine now required a massive, constant flow of liquid. Beneath the bare, dark skin of our ancestors lay a hidden, dormant superpower. Millions of microscopic rivers, quietly waiting to erupt and save the boiling brain. In the animal kingdom, there are two primary types of sweat glands. Most mammals rely heavily on the apocrine gland, which secretes a thick, oily fluid deeply tangled within the hair follicles, mostly used for chemical communication, but it is horribly inefficient, almost entirely useless for cooling down a massive body. Then there is the eccrine gland, producing a thin, watery liquid made mostly of water and salt. For most animals, these are sparsely scattered, mostly found on the bottoms of their paws to increase friction for running. But in humans, nature performed a breathtaking, unprecedented biological swap. We isolated the oily apocrine glands to tiny areas and covered our entire body in a vast network of eccrine glands. Look closely at a modern skyscraper's massive, complex network of cooling pipes inside its walls. That is exactly what lies just millimeters beneath the surface of your own skin. From the top of your head down to your heels, you possess 2 to 5 million of these microscopic cooling vents. We are the undisputed champions of the primate world, capable of discharging huge volumes of liquid every single hour. This incredible internal plumbing allows us to conquer the heat that terrifying predators flee from. But sweat alone is entirely useless if it simply drips off. What was the final, invisible mechanism needed to make it work? The true magic of our cooling system isn't just the water itself. It is what happens the exact moment that droplet reaches the surface. If you look incredibly closely at human skin, you'll realize a startling truth. We are not entirely hairless. We actually possess roughly the same number of hair follicles as a chimpanzee, but evolution replaced our thick, coarse animal fur with microscopic, ultra-fine vellus hair. This invisible layer of golden fuzz isn't there to keep us warm. It is the final piece of the ultimate thermal engine. When liquid is pushed up from the millions of tiny eccrine rivers, it doesn't pool together into heavy, suffocating puddles like it does on animal fur. Instead, it clings delicately to the microscopic vellus hairs, vastly increasing its exposed surface area. And then the wind arrives. Even the faintest breeze rushing over these wet, golden hairs causes the liquid to instantly evaporate into the dry air. This phase change pulls a massive, unprecedented amount of thermal energy directly out of the core. It is the absolute pinnacle of biological air conditioning, allowing a bare, fragile primate to relentlessly outpace heavily armored beasts under the lethal midday sun. But what was the ultimate prize for enduring this exhausting, sweaty, relentless pursuit? Every brilliant thought, every towering city we have ever built was paid for in full by the salty sweat of our ancestors. The massive bounty of provisions secured through endurance hunting provided the dense, high-calorie fuel required to nourish and radically expand our growing brains. As our minds expanded, primitive stone tools were sharpened, complex language was born, and the very first flames of human civilization were kindled in the dark. We did not shed every single hair. We kept the hair on our heads to shield our cooling brains, and patches in sensitive areas to protect our joints and signal our biological maturity. This evolutionary machine hasn't stopped. Today, people living in tropical equators possess vastly superior cooling systems, and those who train intensely teach their bodies to sweat earlier, faster, and more efficiently. So the next time you are running under a blazing sun, feeling a salty drop rolling down your face, do not wipe it away with frustration or disgust. That droplet is a masterpiece of evolution, a biological gold medal proving our unmatched endurance. We are the naked, fragile apes who simply refuse to stop running until we conquered the entire planet.